here. And we'll get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Jordan. I'm the Managing Director of the IEA, and I'm also the Executive Director of the Executives Association of Charlotte. And it's nice to have you on the call today and see some familiar faces and also some new faces as well. If you'd like to pop into the chat and say where you're calling from, if you haven't already done so, or even what industry you're in, that might be helpful for Judy to have as we go along. So feel free to do that. Oh, I'm sorry, Nan?
No, that's okay. Colleen and I are from Calgary, and I'm a lawyer and she's our office assistant.
Oh, perfect. Welcome. Glad to have you on the call today. So as you noticed, we are recording the call, and this will be available on the IEA YouTube page, usually by the end of the week. And I can put a link to that in the chat later so that you can easily find it. If there was something great that you heard today and you want to share it with friends, neighbors, colleagues, what have you, then you're welcome to share that on our YouTube channel, and would love for you to subscribe there. I also have two quick IEA announcements. The first is, if you've attended these webinars, or maybe this is your first one, we do these every month. They're usually around the third-ish Tuesday of the month. That obviously changes from time to time, but generally around the second or third Tuesday of the month, almost always 3 p.m. Eastern time, like we're doing today. And these webinars are hosted and attended by IEA members like yourself. So if you have a great topic that you would like to share, please email me. I'll put my information in the chat as well, and I can get you connected with Lisa Woodstock, who books our webinar speakers. We have had topics ranging from how to market yourself on LinkedIn to home remodeling, to relationships. So really no topic is off limits. If it could impact a business owner, then we're interested in hearing about it. So I do hope that you'll consider that, or if you know someone in your association who would be great for a topic, then certainly let us know that as well, and we will follow up with them. My second and last IEA announcement is that we have finalized the IEA conference for 2024. Much anticipated. Lots of people have been asking about this. It is going to be September 24th through 26th, 2024 in Las Vegas. So I do hope that you will make plans to attend. It's going to be great for business owners and also for your board members, executive directors, and the like. And of course, being in Las Vegas, we're planning to have the conference, have lots of wonderful speakers, but also have a lot of fun. So lots of surprises in store and more announcements coming. But for now, I just ask you to save the date. Okay, now the reason you're all here. Thank you for enduring my announcements. I am really pleased to introduce Judy Blair. Judy is the Chief Operating Officer at Inclusology, a DEI software platform and consulting firm founded in 2016. She has been working in the field for over a decade, and before stepping into her current position, she specialized in anti-racism facilitation. And with that, I hand the program over to Judy.
Thanks, Lisa. I really appreciate that. I'm really excited to be here today to do this webinar with IEA. I've been looking forward to it. So I'm going to start out by sharing my screen. I have some slides for us today. So let me get that going. And I want to start out just by saying hi. I'm Judy Blair. I live in Seattle, and it's a beautiful sunny day in Seattle, unusually. Like Lisa said, I'm Chief Operating Officer for Inclusology. We are a DEI software platform. We do assessment surveys, benchmarking, and some e-learning modules online. And also we provide live training and consulting support for folks who are wanting to move their DEI journey a little bit further. So our tagline and the title of this presentation today is Weaving DEI into the DNA of your company. We really want to help people understand how DEI actually works within an organization, not just sort of checking the boxes. Yes, we did this training, we did that training, but how does it actually play out concretely? What does it look like? So our vision is to eliminate discrimination and oppression in every institution. It's a big vision, obviously, but we really want to live in a world where DEI consultants aren't necessary anymore. We really want to work ourselves out of a job. So that's our vision. And here's who we are. We are a small but mighty team. You can see me on there, but also our founder, Dr. Cheryl Ingram. She is a little bit of a serial entrepreneur, but she is a powerhouse. And her vision really was to create a company that made it so people who look like her felt like they were actually welcome in the workplace and didn't run into discrimination, all sorts of other things. So this is who we are. We are a majority folks of color team, and we are completely remote and distributed around the country. We've got folks in Washington, we've got folks in California and New York and Nebraska. All right, so before we dive into this topic, I just want to say I am building in time at the end of this for Q&A. And so just make a note of any questions that you have. You can stack them up in the chat if you want, or you can just make your own notes. There's a possibility that your question will be answered along the way. So if not, I will do my best to go through them at the end. Okay. And let me make sure I've got the chat open so I can see it. Okay. So I wanted to start us out just by defining our terms so that we all know what we're talking about, right? So what is DEI? So the letters stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these are some really quick definitions of those. We're going to go into them a little bit deeper in just a moment. But diversity basically is about having multiple social identities present in the workplace. And you'll hear me talking about race and gender, age, size, sexuality, ability. You'll also hear me use the term marginalized identities. And when I say that, what I'm referring to is folks who have generally been discriminated against. And so that's what I mean when I say marginalized. If you think about sort of a piece of paper, there's the focus is in the center, and then there are folks on the margins that don't get as much focus, right? Equity is fairness and justice, right? It means recognizing that we don't all start from the same place and that we need to make adjustments and acknowledge that. And then inclusion is equitable opportunities exist for all employees and qualified candidates, right, to be successful and fully contribute to an organization. You might see other letters added on to this acronym. We've had this acronym for a long time now, but you may see DEIB, and that B stands for belonging. I also run across the acronym JEDI sometimes, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm just waiting for Disney to sort of start talking to people about using JEDI. But I've seen a couple of other ones as well that I can't remember off the top of my head, but the ones that we've been using for so long are DEI. And usually if you see other letters added, the core beliefs are the same, but there's just some other aspects added on. So diversity. Diversity can be both visible and invisible, right? If we think about the different identities that I just mentioned very briefly, like age or race or gender, sexuality, some of those are visible and some of those are not when we look at folks, right? And some of them we may be making incorrect assumptions about when we're looking at people. Diversity brings together people with different perspectives, which allows us to spot potential problems more easily. I think probably most people on the call are familiar with the fact that there's a business case for diversity in your staff, that more diverse staffs result in a better product or better services for clients. When we don't have diversity, we can have things happen like this. So this was an example, this was an experience that Joz Wang had with her brand new Nikon Coolpix camera, probably about 15 years ago, where we have to wonder if there was anyone of East Asian heritage on the software development team that was looking at having the camera figuring
Recording in
figuring out
progress.
if people blinked or not, right? And so clearly she did not blink in this picture, but her camera software thought she may have. And it's possible that if they had had more folks of East Asian heritage on the team writing that software, they would have caught this. We don't know that for sure. But, you know, when we're missing certain perspectives, we may end up creating a subpar product or, you know, not servicing our clients in the best way that they need. Equity. Some of you may have seen different versions of this particular graphic. This is one that I really like from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. If we look on the left, we've got an example of equality. Everyone has the same kind of giant curb to get down to cross the street, right? And it doesn't matter whether they're in a wheelchair or if they're visually impaired, or if they are a small person or a large person. This is the thing. You know, they all equally have to deal with this giant curb. On the right, we've got a situation where everyone gets what they need, right? We've got the curb cut, which obviously helps folks in wheelchairs and helps other people as well. That child didn't have to leap off a cliff to cross the street, right? And we've also got textured pavement for folks who are visually impaired so that they can tell where the crosswalk is. We've also got signals. We've got visual lit up signals for folks who can see to let them know that it's safe to cross. And we also have audio signals here for visually impaired people to be able to cross the street a little bit more easily and safely, right? And so equity is creating a situation where everyone gets what they need rather than everyone gets the same thing. I will point out equity is often more expensive than equality, right? But that is one of the facts of life, unfortunately. But if we understand the barriers that people are facing, we can actually create something that is better and more advantageous for them. And then inclusion. Inclusion is making a space where people are comfortable speaking their minds, right? It also means actually listening to what they say and acting upon their words, right? And those are important pieces to this. We have all been in situations where someone has asked us for our opinion and then they have completely ignored it, right? Inclusion is actually taking that opinion into account. I used an image here of people dancing because there's a really well-known quote in the DEI world from Vernee Myers, where she said, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. I would argue that inclusion is actually being on the party planning committee, where you get to actually say, hey, I'd like this kind of music played if possible too, right? It's not just being asked to dance, but it is in fact being included in the whole process. So those are our three main concepts. So here's where we're going to get into more of the meat of this webinar today. Whose job is DEI? DEI is often seated in human resources or people ops or people and culture, whatever you call it at your organization, right? And it's often viewed as the purview of those departments while everyone else takes a more passive role. We know, though, from research and from our own experiences that things like just attending a training session don't result in actual change, right? Depending on the person in the session itself, participants may find training useful, interesting, or a waste of time. The most important thing we can get out of training our workforce is making sure there's an understanding of how this stuff plays out in their daily lives at work. What does it look like when we apply the principles and knowledge we've been taught? And so it may be under the purview of HR, people ops, or if you have a chief diversity officer, it may be their job to sort of drive the process of doing training and reviewing policies and all of those kinds of things. But everyone else has to also be thinking about this and evaluating the ways in which they work with each other. DEI really gets to the heart of how we want to be with each other at work, and how we want ourselves to be treated and how we want others to be treated. And when you start to sort of shift attitudes around DEI, then things start to kind of ripple out into other parts of the company, right? And this is my one cheesy transition here, is that things ripple out from your team, your department, from the company as a whole, right? Even if your clients see that you're treating your employees a certain way, that has an impact on how they do business with you, right? Setting an example and really to be, you know, a little trite, like being the change you want to see in the world, right? So what do we do if our workplace isn't already diverse? I get this question a lot from folks, and it can feel like a chicken and egg kind of situation, where if your workplace isn't diverse, it can feel not comfortable to folks who come in with marginalized identities, right? And then they don't stick around, and then your workplace is still not diverse. And so what you have to do is start asking, why is our organization like this? Why is our organization not diverse? And there may be all kinds of reasons, and some of them are within your control and some of them may not be. I work with clients whose industries, entire industries, are not diverse. And that can be a really tough thing to try to overcome, because if there aren't people in the pipeline in your industry, then you can't hire them, right? But you have to think about, like, why are we not seeing more diversity within our employee pool and our staff? And then you have to ask, who is missing, right? And this is a non-exhaustive list of identities to consider, right? But think about, like, whose identities or whose perspectives are you missing? And how might you gain access to those perspectives? And I have on here, you know, the ones that you would expect to see. Socioeconomic class, I added here both current and past, because very often people grew up in a certain socioeconomic class and now they may be in a different one. And those formative years impact how they make the assumptions that they make about people, or all sorts of things. But where they're at now also makes a difference. So these are things to really think about. Thinking about gaining access to these missing perspectives, you can do that by hiring, right? That's one option. You can also identify groups of people within your industry, right? Very often there are professional organizations that are specifically for particular marginalized identities. And you can identify community groups in your own location, in your community as well. My one caveat around community groups, or even honestly professional organizations, is that we have to keep in mind that marginalized communities have often been mined for their knowledge and their expertise without compensation or even resulting change. So we need to be really careful about building relationships that are mutually beneficial for folks. If you're going to approach community groups for input, you need to ask them what you can do to support them in return, and then do that, right? Building relationships is building trust. And if you show people that they can trust you, then they will help you. All right. So next up, what if we're not hiring right now? Recruitment and retention are often sort of the second thing that organizations try to tackle after training, right? But you're not always in a position to hire more staff, right? You can't just add more people because you want to. So instead of focusing on diversity, we can look at the other two letters, right? Equity and inclusion here. We can see like how can we make sure that we are actually asking people to be on that metaphorical party planning committee, right? Like how does that play out in our organization? How can we offer benefits that speak to our current staff and their needs while also looking toward future staff as well, right? Benefits are a huge thing that can attract people, as you well know, and having benefits that actually are valuable to folks will help you diversify your staff. One of the things that we will often talk with clients about that they haven't really thought about are things like a pay equity gap analysis, right? It falls under compensation, obviously, maybe not necessarily benefits, but figuring out, are we actually paying people fairly? And the next step after that would be pay transparency if your organization is ready for it. Those are equity issues, right? They're not diversity issues, they're equity. They're making sure that people have what they are supposed to have and what they need. Right. How do we know if we're heading in the right direction? It's another question that clients often ask me. And my answer is ask people. We recommend an annual employee survey done by a third party that captures demographic information as well as how people perceive the company and its leadership. Obviously, as a company providing third party surveys and other ways of assessing where you're at, we recommend a third party for a couple of different reasons. One is that we know how to write the right questions, right? Writing a survey question is actually really hard. And it's really easy for folks to write one that doesn't quite get at what they need or is leading in some way to make people think that they should answer in a certain way. So we have the expertise to help you put together questions that actually will work, right? We've got a bank of, I think, close to 500 different questions on different topics that we can pull, and we can also create custom ones that allow you to really get at what it is you want to know about your employees' experience. The other reason that it's good to have a third party do this is trust. When we're asking people for demographic information, especially, they want to know where it's going and who's going to be able to see it. And so, for instance, our software allows our clients to sort of dig into the data and see, kind of cross-reference, how did, Black employees answer this question, or how did how did gay employees answer this question, or, all kinds of things like that. But if there are fewer than 5 people at your organization that have a particular identity, we don't allow people to drill down into that data. You will not be able to find out that the Black 30-year-old woman in HR thinks this about this question, right? And that's the kind of identifying information that people are really concerned about when they're filling out surveys for their employees. As much as we want to feel like everyone has a mutually trusting relationship in our organizations, it's not always the case. And so if we want the real information, especially if it's negative feedback, we really have to work to make sure that people trust the person who's processing that data, right? So yeah, we think you should ask people, how are we doing? Our Our survey questions include things like, how much do you trust this organization to do DEI work? Right? That's a tough question. And it can be a tough question for leadership to read the answers to. But if you don't know where the pain points are in your organization, you can't fix them. So if you're thinking about this and you're thinking, oh, it's a lot and I really want to do the right thing, but I also know that I have like a certain amount of my workforce that's going to be resistant to talking about this, doing this, thinking about it. I have this statistic for you. This is from research that the University of Pennsylvania did a few years ago that found that only 25% of a group of people need to take a stand on something for change to occur. You do not need a majority of folks on board to make changes at your organization. So if things feel difficult, keep this in mind. If you want to do the right thing and you're coming up against resistance, you don't need everybody on board. That's something to consider. All right. So I've got some questions for organizational reflection. Thinking about your company as a whole. These are just some preliminary questions that I would ask, and there are all kinds of other ones that you can ask yourselves as well. But one of the first ones that I will ask senior leaders is, how are mistakes treated in your company? Are they opportunities for learning, or are they opportunities to shame people? How are mistakes treated? And are they treated differently under different managers? Which is a huge point for those of us who have, maybe a layer of middle management or more than one layer of middle management. We have to know that the folks managing our teams are living these principles as well, right? We want to make sure that people aren't afraid to make mistakes, right? Because that's how you innovate and come up with new ideas. But also that mistakes are a part of the human condition, right? To be human is to be fallible, and we will all make mistakes. I'm sure I've made mistakes in this presentation so far, but that's how life is. And so we have to be able to deal with that and figure out how to move forward from a mistake in a way that takes care of whatever the problem is that's been created, the person takes responsibility for it, but that it doesn't become a part of their identity. Oh, that's Jerry. That's the guy who screwed up the sales report last time. We don't want him to do it again, right? Like, that's not fair. Let Jerry do the sales report again. He might have figured out how to do it right. If his manager helps him or gave him the support he needed, right, he should be able to do it. So that's one major question to ask. Another one is, how do people suggest changes to policies or processes, right? If there is a barrier to someone accessing benefits, or a barrier to, honestly, someone wanting to work for your company, you want to know what that is. And so you have to have a mechanism in place for people to suggest changes, right? And when you're thinking about that mechanism, also think about where there may be bottlenecks, where some information might get stuck, or if there are gatekeepers. And gatekeepers are formal and informal, right? We could have, it's absolutely appropriate to have, HR be a gatekeeper around like the sexual harassment policy, for sure. But it may not be appropriate for, Margaret, the CEO's executive assistant, to be a gatekeeper around the sexual harassment policy, right? Like, just making sure that you know who is part of each process, and they know what their responsibilities are and where their responsibilities end. where their authority ends and where they need to pass things on to someone else. Right? And then the last one I have on here is whose suggestions are typically listened to and implemented. If you think about the identities of your staff and the people who are coming up with ideas of different ways to do things, different products to offer, different services to offer, who gets listened to? And who never gets asked, right? That's the other thing, is there may be people coming up with all sorts of ideas and they don't want to bring them up, right? They may be afraid to bring them up because people will think they're silly, or going back to the sort of mistake, how are mistakes treated, right? Or there may be all sorts of reasons why people don't speak up in meetings or over email or chat in Teams or whatever. So think about where you've seen suggestions coming from, whose suggestions get listened to, and what actually gets implemented. So those are thoughts for the organization as a whole. And then I have questions also for personal reflection, right? Because we're all people. We all bring ourselves into work every day, and our own experiences, assumptions, the ways we were brought up, our families of origin, all sorts of things inform the ways in which we actually interact with our coworkers and colleagues. So some questions for personal reflection that I came up with for this today. First one is, how do I personally handle being challenged? Right? If someone says, oh, I don't agree that that's the way we should do that, how do I take that? Am I willing to listen? Or do I immediately get defensive? Right? How often do I ask for input from others? This can be a hard one, especially if we're in a small business and we are just trying to get stuff done. Right? It can be really easy to just be like, this is the way we got to do it. This is how we figured out, how I figured out the best way to do it, and not ask for input from anyone else. Sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. It can really help to ask for input. So asking yourself, how often do you do that? And what are the circumstances under which you do that or don't, is a good idea. The next question is very similar, but not the same. And that's, how often do I take others' input into account when making decisions? Right? So that takes us back to the inclusion definition from earlier, right? It's actually listening to people and then acting upon what they've told you, right? So how often do I take other people's input into account? If I'm just asking for it and then going ahead and doing what I wanted in the first place, it's not really living that principle, right? And then the last one I put on here is, how do my assumptions about other people show up in the way I work with them? You may have heard the terms implicit bias or unconscious bias. And those are biases that we have that are part of our socialization. Some of them are part of our just lizard brain sensing danger. But they're all kinds of assumptions that we may not realize that we're making about people when we're interacting with them. And so those assumptions show up in the way that we work with folks. And it's good to sort of ask ourselves, am I responding to this person in this way because of who they are or because of what they're saying to me? And those are two different things, right? Okay. So I blew through a lot of this really quickly, which means we have a ton of time for Q&A, and I'm hoping that you all have some. So do y'all have any questions? Please feel free to just unmute and ask a question, or you can put something in the chat.
Thanks, Judy. Richard here. DEI seems to be sort of a recent phrase or acronym, how long has it existed in the corporate world or in business?
Yeah,
You mentioned it's been around a while.
it has been around a while. And when I say a while, I feel like probably 15 to 20 years, maybe. You know, in sort of the 90s, we had multiculturalism. And we had some of that in the 80s as well, sort of the food flags, festivals kind of celebrations. And that's where a lot of our heritage months come from and things like that. But you know, before that, there was the movement for tolerance, right, which was very much civil rights era language. And I don't know about you, but I don't really enjoy being tolerated. So it's really just been this kind of evolution of language, but also understanding of what it is that we're trying to do. But yeah, I would say DEI has probably been around about 20 years.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that. I'm
No,
not
that's fine. It's just I've been in the corporate world as a vendor for many years. That accounts for my gray hairs. And I do, you know, it's interesting in the sense of inclusiveness. Back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, it was the concept of employee involvement, where you build employees teams to kind of try and improve processes and things like that. And that never seemed to go anywhere because, you know, there were just so many different, when you do ask the question as part of inclusivity, and you come up with, you know, so many different answers, how do you wade through all of that? How do you know, have management deal with that?
Yeah, decision-making processes. There's a whole like area of study, right, around decision-making processes and the ways in which people make decisions and sort of what's a better way and what's a worse way. And you know, one of the things that people in my field really like to talk about is consensus decision-making, where you try to bring everyone to consensus. That takes forever, right? And sometimes you don't actually have the time for that. Sometimes you do have the time for it and you just don't think you do. You'd like to have an answer sooner, but actually you can wait and figure out how to get everyone's input and figure out something that will work for everybody. But often in the corporate world, right, there's this sense of urgency around decisions. And there's this sense of sort of strength behind being a decision maker and being the person who says, this is the way we're going to do it, which doesn't lend itself to inclusivity. Like you said, Richard, it can be hard to kind of take all of the disparate responses that we get and come up with something that works. You're never going to have something that works for everybody. One of the things that I think sort of scares people a little bit about DEI and work like this is that there's often pushback from somebody. There's always going to be pushback from somebody. Doesn't matter what you're trying to do. It's going to be the wrong way to do it for someone. And that's one of the reasons why I encourage people to really think about how mistakes are handled in your organization, because what someone else views as a really great solution can be viewed as someone else as a huge mistake. And so figuring out like where the middle ground may be, or not even who's right or wrong, but like whose perspective is more important or more useful, can be very helpful. I feel like I went a little rambly.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I have one quick question. Then I'm gonna let someone else.
Yeah.
In your experience, what drives more success? Is it a bottom-up approach in a corporate environment, or is it a top-down management showing by example of advancing DEI principles?
It's both. You know, often over the course of the years that I've been in this position with this company, I have talked to a lot of folks who are trying to make change from the bottom up, and they don't have any power and they don't have any budget, right? And that is extremely difficult. But there is value in having folks working from the bottom up, surfacing problems that people higher up in an organizational hierarchy maybe don't remember or don't even know exist, right? And so there's a lot of value in having people at the sort of lower grassroots type of level sort of surfacing those issues. But I think that you also need leadership, senior leadership, to be really intentional and understanding and on board with trying to make the organization a more equitable place to work. And so bottom up by itself doesn't work. Top down tends not to work by itself either, although it works better just because of the power structures involved. But having both of those things allows you to kind of get a broader perspective of what actually needs to happen.
Great, thank you. I'll leave it for someone else. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else have questions?
Judy, that was great, really informative. I have a question. You touched on it really briefly, talking about salary transparencies. And my husband's, he works for a smallish consulting firm, and they had an issue last year where some of the younger project managers started posting on a company-wide Slack channel their salaries and said, everybody post. And it caused some problems.
I bet.
So is that something you you encourage, or is there, what's the best way to go about that?
So I think pay transparency is great. I also think that if you're doing it as an organization, company-wide, there has to be a lot of groundwork done beforehand. You have got to do that pay gap analysis, right? Because you do not want a bunch of people noticing that they are underpaid, right? Like, that's bad. So pay them correctly, do the analysis and pay them correctly first. And then you can move into pay transparency. I don't recommend just sort of like opening the books and right. I certainly support workers sharing salary information, absolutely, because that's one of those ways, like I was just talking about with Richard, that the grassroots sort of surfaces the problem, right? And can force an organization into addressing a problem if there is in fact a major pay gap. And so that's great for the workers. It's not great for the company. So yeah, I would say that organizations should think about how they can possibly work towards pay transparency. You know, the recent laws that we've seen about having salary ranges on job postings are really helping with that, I think, in a lot of ways, although some of those ranges that are posted are kind of amazing, like 80 grand to 200 grand range. Yeah, pay transparency is something you really have to do the groundwork for if you want to sort of come from like a crisis management perspective, right? Like, you don't want this blowing up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think a lot of the problem you get into too is that people think they're doing the same job as someone else and they're really not. And that's, you know, I think you get into a big mess there.
It's possible. I mean, I'm not a compensation expert by any means, but I do know that it's really important to make sure you understand what your different job titles mean, right? And what the pay bands are within those job titles and how someone moves from one pay band to another. You have to be really crystal clear on that. And then when folks are like, well, I'm a strategic advisor too, and that guy's a strategic advisor too, and he's getting paid more than me, you can say, okay, but also he's done this, this, and this that moves him up to this pay band, right? So you just have to be super crystal clear. Yeah, I see that Karen put a note in the chat. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate that input. Any other questions from folks? We still have about 15 minutes. I talked faster than I anticipated.
All right, I'll jump back in again. So you mentioned in the beginning that your goal is to see 100% achievement in terms of DEI. What are you, just based on your company's work, where are we in terms of it's just sort of kind of a
I don't expect to live long enough for for me to have worked myself out of a job, honestly. I think that there are a lot of really great people doing really good work out there. And I think that even though we've, this kind of work has been being done for 50, 60 years at this point, we are still at the beginning. Very much so. And some of that is what I wanted to kind of talk with folks about today, because we have kind of siloed this DEI work into, well, I just go to this training once a year and then I've done my DEI work, right? But it actually needs to change the ways in which we think about people and the ways that we interact with people. Yeah.
well, I guess you'll have a job for a lifetime.
I guess so.
Judy, you probably know where I'm going to come from. I listen, and I'll focus on your use of the word organization.
Yeah.
And I can really follow along with what you're saying. Then we switch to association. And it's the dilemma that I have for Seattle execs and for our committee. And we have new leadership going into the first of the year, which I think will be good. But I don't see our role as one of training our members. It's more leading by example, perhaps. And I'm wondering if you used the word, when you said do a survey, well, you know what that did to me.
Yes. So Melissa, you and I have talked a few times about trying to do DEI work within a volunteer organization or association, right? And it is much more difficult, right? The power structures are different, and it really does become a leading by example thing, like you were saying, because you don't have mechanisms in place to sort of, for lack of a better term, reprimand people, or for there to be consequences that affect them really on a day-to-day basis, right? If we're talking about trying to do DEI in an executives association, that's a group of people who get together once a week and network with each other, and some of them see each other outside of that space, but some of them don't. And again, there's maybe a whole range of opinions on whether we should even utter the term DEI, right? It's much more difficult, and I recognize the difficulty. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? And doing a survey of membership can be helpful, depending on what that survey is asking. It also can be helpful to just do some different stuff and see what happens. Yeah. One of the things that I'm pretty sure I said to one of our DEI committee members at Seattle execs is, find out what some of the barriers are to membership or to being part of the organization. Like, why do people leave, right? Find out what those are. It doesn't have to be in a survey. You can just call someone and ask, right? If you're doing exit interviews for people who leave the organization, assuming that they haven't closed their business and retired or whatever, right? Or even still, getting their experience can be really helpful. So yeah, you can do some exit interviews. You can talk to folks who have marginalized identities, who are part of your group. Find out what makes them uncomfortable. Find out what doesn't make them uncomfortable about the group, right? You don't always want to be looking for the negative. Find out what you're doing right and do more of that. And yeah, have leadership that's not afraid to use the term DEI or, something along those lines. And like I said, you just need 25%.
That was a
And-
really interesting point.
I love that statistic. You can look at the actual research study online, but yeah, you only need 25%. And very often we stop ourselves from doing stuff because we're like, oh, well, there's only a few people who are with me on this. You don't need 51%. You just need 25.
So Judy and Melissa, you bring up an interesting point about the execs associations, because on this call today, we have 4 executive directors, myself, Melissa, Cindy from Akron, and Kern from Honolulu. So 4 different associations represented here. Melissa, we don't have a DEI committee of any kind in Charlotte. I don't know how many associations do. What is that committee tasked with?
That's a good question. We've actually had the committee in place. Well, it started during COVID because some of our first meetings were Zoom meetings, and my personal opinion is that Zoom didn't help us at all as a means of introducing this to the group. But our awareness is much better than it was. Our look is much better than it was. And I think the approach that the new committee is going to take as we start the new year, Judy was very helpful and provided us a list of local organizations that we could approach. And how to support in return is something that I really have to get back to the committee with, but where we're reaching out to other organizations and being upfront with them about we want to make ourselves more diverse. And are you interested in helping, and what could we do to help you? So that's the main thing, is we're still on a big push to increase our membership, but we want to do it with the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I meet with executive associations all the time. I have a meeting with Windsor and Detroit both this week, via Zoom. And the one thing I hear again and again and again and again is how not diverse their groups are. I hear that from associations. Doesn't matter where in the US or Canada you are, a lot of associations struggle with having a lot aging males as their soon to be retired male business owners is what makes up a lot of our associations. So I know diversity is something that a lot of our associations need, and that goes beyond race and extends into age and years of owning their business and all of those things.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to say we are almost 50-50 female male membership.
Oh, that's wildly impressive. You might be one of the only associations. I mean, in Charlotte, I have 50 members, and I think I have 4 women.
That's when I started 16 years ago. There were 5. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to Judy's 25%, because I've had people say, well, you recruited all these women. How'd you get the women? We had a couple of strong new women come in, and who do they know? They know other women.
That's
business,
right.
and it's the same way we became white male.
Yeah.
We're now mixing. Yeah. So we just have to get our party more colorful.
I love that you bring that up, Melissa, that it's the same way the organization became white and male in the first place, right?
Yeah.
It's because it's who we know, it's who we hang out with, it's who we do business with. And so diversifying our own circles allows us to bring in more people with different identities. So yeah.
And I'm not Greg from Calgary, so I don't have other numbers in place, but our age wise, we're much younger group than we were.
I was just trying to figure it out. I think we're close to 50-50 male and female. We definitely need younger people in the organization. You look around the room on Wednesday mornings and you see a lot of older people. But I think that seems to be pretty universal in all kinds of associations. I mean, I think it's a push that everybody needs to make in every organization they're involved with, because I mean, even at the golf course, I mean, we've got way more senior members than we do members that are just young entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Yeah, someone, I don't know where I heard this, but I heard Rotary, which was always very important in the Seattle area anyway. Their membership is dropping off, and they are attributing it to the younger group is just not interested in it.
That's what I'm seeing. Like they're just not, I mean, we were all busy bringing up our families too, but I think the younger people seem to have a different look about how they bring up their families. And I mean, I worked the whole time my daughter was growing up, but people don't seem to do that anymore. And people seem to not want to get up early in the morning and go to a meeting because they got to take the kids to school or whatever. So I think there's a lot of that going on too.
I mean, I don't like to get up early and go to a meeting anyway.
See, I'd much rather do it before I go to work. whatever it is.
Well, I want to add the fact that, you know, we were just talking about the fact that most associations started sort of like the old boys network, right? You know, where guys get together and, you know, chat and talk story. But look at the irony of this webinar, because Kern and I are the only men
Yeah.
on here.
Does that
So
just mean we're more interested, or?
Well, we're trying to, I think Kern and I are trying to find those 25% to kind of motivate our chapter to grow, you know, into what we want to be, which is equity in a lot of ways. And you know, it was very informative, Judy. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, this was great, Judy. Really appreciate your time today. And like I said at the beginning, this recording will be available on the IEA YouTube page, hopefully by the end of the week.
Great.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everybody. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I could talk about this stuff for hours. So thank you.
Really, really interesting topic. Thanks for sharing,
Good.
Judy.
Glad to
Thanks.
have you as ours, Judy. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thanks.